Yeah, not to wait too long.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna slowly start introducing Manlio for those who are here but doesn't know him. So he's an associate professor of applied physics at the University of Padua, where he leads the commune. I think I read it right, I hope. Commune lab for multi-layer modeling and analysis of complex systems. And then his research lies at the interface of statistical physics, applied mathematics, computer science, and then focusing on structure and dynamics of complex systems from biological to sociological and technological networks, with an emphasis of multi-layer interactions, emergent, and resilience. This is why I like this, like the whole package. There are all the good stuff in there. Um, He's also the director of Padua Center for Network Medicine and the Mediterranean School of Complex Networks and serves as executive board of Complex System Society. But education-wise, he holds, well, you guessed it probably, a PhD in physics. Yeah, from the University of Catania. And he's also active on social media a bit, but mostly writing incredible blog posts. Just go
Oh,
check them out. They're the
thank you.
best. And yeah, I think we can start actually. So the floor is yours.
Oh,
I'm looking
okay.
forward to this very much.
So thank you very much, Kaison, for the nice introduction, also for advertising a bit the newsletter. I swear I didn't pay Kaison for the advertisement, so it came for free. Beautiful surprise. Also, thank you, Petra, for the invitation. Um, it's a pleasure to be here and to discuss with you for a while about, let's say, what we are doing now in this couple of years, but it's something that is started literally 10 years ago. So it's not going to be a technical talk because I wanted to keep it as interdisciplinary as possible. Actually, I would like that you guys, especially the ones coming from the neuroscience community, can provide feedback, also criticisms, and to some extent also attempt to use our stuff. So there will be anyway some mathematics. It's unavoidable. I am by training a theoretical physicist, so cope with that. And but I promise I will not go through the technicalities. Okay, so I will try to keep this as high level as possible. So before starting, I just again ask for a cross check. Jason, if you can tell me that you see my slide and my pointer. I don't see your face, so
Looks perfectly. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
great. So let's let's start. I would like to start this talk by discussing just a couple of minutes about this guy. For the ones among you who don't know who this guy is, this is a tardigrade. It's an amazing organism in my opinion, and here on the right side you can see where you can find it. It's almost everywhere on in this planet, and the point is that this guy actually appeared more or less 500 million years ago, and it's hyper robust. I will use this term. What do I mean? Essentially, this guy is able to survive to a range of temperatures that are prohibitive for any other organism. It can live in the almost in the outer space for minutes, but it can survive also at more than 150 degrees and for years, even in absence of water. He can survive to amount of radiation so that is fatal to humans and to many other organisms as well. And he can resist up to incredible pressures. So essentially, it's a kind of mythological guy. And actually, it's pretty real because it exists in our on our planet, I was saying it's pervasive since the last half a billion years. The point is how this guy is able to have all of this repertoire of functions that make it able to survive and to be so robust to external perturbation. So this is the very starting point of the questions behind this talk. But he's not the only organism that attracted my attention during the last years. Here, for instance, in the top left, you see this is an axolotl. He's another funny organism. He always seems to smile. Actually, it doesn't. But his superpower is the cellular regeneration. Then there are other things that are interesting. For sure, you know better than me. This is, well, here we had it's going to appear here again. It's here. The very recent connectome from the fruit fly, so the Drosophila melanogaster. And well, it's a perfect example of how information processing can enable an organism to perform specific tasks. Here you have a beautiful example of biological, what I call biological optimization. Actually, this guy, the superpower of this guy, this is the slime mold, is that he has no nervous system, but still is able to perform complex tasks like looking for food and building complex networks at the end of the day of and connections that allow it to explore and exploit at the same time its environment to survive. But these are mostly related to something that is genetic, so very hardly encoded in this organism. Another organism that is very, very interesting for me is this guy. These are the fire ants. They can be found in the South America, in the Amazon forests, and possibly also in some parts of Sicily. I don't know exactly why. And what is the superpower of this guy? Well, during the flood in the forest, they they will likely die. And to avoid this, and so to survive, to support survival, they start to cooperate and to build this floating platform, I would say, of living platform that allow them to reach the land and then to survive. It's very amazing because almost nobody dies during this process. So they are very well organized and coordinated, even if there is no central coordination. So this is another feature typical of complex systems. And the question that is common to all these systems is, okay, they are very diverse, but at the same time, they hide some kind of a riddle, no? Because they have superpowers. And the point is, where these superpowers come from? So, of course, I am a network scientist, and during my career, I have studied many of these systems, and I have devoted most of my career to the analysis of and the modeling of multi-layer systems. So here you have the C. elegans, and for the C. elegans, it's very beautiful model organism because we know genetic and regulatory system network, the metabolic network, and so forth and so on, down to the connectome, so how each neuron is connected to any other neuron. And the point is that even if we have these beautiful structures and they are interdependent, interconnected, and you can model them as layers of different networks, the point is that the functionality I'm talking about in this talk cannot be, let's say, reconciled only with the information that comes from the structure. Actually, we need something more. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, we have also multiple scales at play. So in a living system, or in general in living systems, here, this is another beautiful representation of the many scales that are involved in biology, also in natural medicine, and from the DNA, so from the genomic level, passing through protein-protein interactions, so the biomodules, pathways, cells, up to an organism and a population as a whole. And the point that for each scale, there is at least one or more networks who are at work to enable specific functions. And what is the interesting point here? That if you have a perturbation at one scale, this perturbation has the ability, in principle, to propagate across other scales. This is very common nowadays to think about in applications to system medicine, for instance, and also for therapies. When you apply, you get a drug for a specific task, and of course you apply this at the molecular level, and then you see the effects at a higher scale. So the point is that what I want to fix with you now at the very beginning is that functionality, what I call functionality, depends on how systems respond to this type of perturbation that can happen at some scale. This is not only for biological systems, this is very general for complex adaptive systems. For instance, this is the case, this is real data, the representation of outages in New Orleans in 2021. And here you see that, well, there is the structure, that is the city, and the change in the color in the heat map is because of the outage. Of course, the fact that we had the outage doesn't alter the structure, but we have a problem with the functionality of this network. And this is the main point. So functionality is different from structure. And in this talk, we see why. Since I am using this word, functionality, let me explain a little bit what I mean with that and how it's different from the word function. So when I think about a function, usually I think about local operations, like component that act according to some causal mechanism to perform a specific causal operation. This can be binding, catalysis, or gating, whatever you like. At the same time, there are also collective functions. So when you have a collection of dynamical processes that are emerging from the interactions between different entities to form, for instance, circuits and so far and so on. In this case, you can have the propagation of signals, you can have feedback, coordination, etc. So both of them are what we call functions. Instead, functionality, it's something a little bit different. It's something that is related to the accessible behaviors of a system that are available under specific constraints. Robustness, adaptability, and resilience are all examples of emergent functionality. So we can say that a function is a realized operation, and a functionality is the set of the accessible functions that can be achieved under some conditions, under some constraints by a system. The main point is that all of these the systems and the subsystems, so the layers that are involved to describe a real complex systems. It can be a multi-layer, it can be a multi-scale. They are all physical, of course, but they, taken individually, they describe only a specific aspect of the system. Okay? Instead, with functionality, we describe what the system can do by exploiting the interdependencies that it has across layers and across different levels or scales. So the main question at this point is, can we predict this functionality from first principles? That is where my physics background enters and play an important role. So, before going to that, let me stress a little bit what I think it's important when we attack problems in complexity science in general. So when we observe, well, this is also for science more generally. When we see observe a phenomenon, actually, I think that we are like this guy in the metaphor and story given by Plato about the man in the cave. Essentially, there is a real phenomenon over here, but we cannot see it directly. What we see is a kind of projection. Then the source of this projection, it's a matter of philosophy, probably. I don't want to enter into details, but of course, we can agree that we never observe the reality, but we observe a kind of a filtering reality. Okay, this filter can come from the processing that we have through our brain of the input data and stuff like that. So what we need to learn to gain real insights about reality is not just the observation alone, but it's something that can help us to model and to make hypotheses about what the process that is behind what we observe. Let me give you a more practical example. Here, probably everyone knows this phenomenon. This is the flocking of birds. And what we see here is a very beautiful phenomenon. It's a complex system, fully decentralized. It's to some extent emergent. And what we have is the state of the world at a given time. Then, according to some laws, it can be physical, biochemical, whatever you like, the world, or what we call the world, evolves at a time t plus delta t. Then we choose some observable, we measure those observable, and we see the observable, we see the outcome. When we make a model, actually, what do we get? The procedure is similar, but we need, of course, to encode these measurements, these observable, into some form. We need to add some initial conditions, and then here it comes, the modeling part. Essentially, we need to introduce some formal rules. These formal rules can be mathematical rules, it can be agent-based rules, it can be whatever you like, but they are formal to some extent. And then we allow our system to evolve according to these mechanisms that are based on our hypothesis. Then what we get is an outcome, again, that is now the predicted outcome that we compare against the observed outcome. Actually, this is very nice because here this is a simulation of the same phenomenon. And what we'll have learned after almost 50 years of cognitive science and the pioneering works by Langton, Patti, etc., is that what matters is the phenomenon, not the substrate. Okay, so we can think that this is real, that we are capturing the emergence of this decentralized organization, mesoscale organization. So, in my view, it's important to stress that we need generative models. We need to make hypotheses about what we observe before making an analysis. And then we can think, we can see that models are like compressed stories about cause and effect, if there is any. So the point is, okay, Manlio, you are telling us we need models, but formal models need laws. So how do we get there? Well, there are many ways. And here, the last decade, what we have tried to do and partially achieved just in the last couple of years is to use variational principles. Let me tell you very, very quickly about that. So one point in physics that we made most of the time in any very well developed theory nowadays is this question essentially. So there exists any quantity that after some extremization, some optimization, it can be you get the minimum or the maximum of this quantity. It provides a description of the observed phenomenon that is at the same time the least biased description of that phenomenon under specific constraints, okay, physically motivated constraints. So in physics, we do this most of the time, as I was mentioning here. If you are curious, you can check a vast literature. It's more than 70 years now that we do that. Let me go very, very quickly through what has been done because we need the same mindset to build the equivalent for describing functionality in networks. So here, my question is for you is, imagine that you have a spring over here, this is a ball, And then what we do is to observe that under the effect of this spring, the ball will affect. This is a wall, okay, if you want. The ball goes there, rebounds here, and arrives here. Okay, very nice. But the question is why it has chosen this trajectory and not this trajectory, for instance. You can think about it for a while. I have not that much time, so I can tell you that a way to describe why the red trajectory and not any other trajectory is that if you introduce a specific quantity that is called the action, and you assume that there is this variational principle, that is the principle of stationary action, then under this extremization, under this optimization, you will find the equation of the motion of this particle, of this ball. And it will correspond exactly to this trajectory. Okay, but the world is not deterministic as that. So we have stochastic components, we have noise, etc. Well, the point is that we can do very, very similarly. We can use a similar argument. And for each trajectory, from here to here, that is now stochastic, as you can see, there are many, we can build an ensemble of paths, essentially. And for each trajectory, we have an action, and then the probability to observe a specific trajectory is proportional to this quantity. This quantity, well, is the exponential of the action. The process through which you find this result is called the maximum caliber. You don't care about the technicalities. It's the idea that is important. And it's very important, actually, because with this approach, you can end up to describe diffusive processes, thermodynamics, quantum mechanics. So it's pretty relevant. Then, if you are at equilibrium, so you have no information about the trajectory, but just the steady states, then you end up into stochastic states. And there you can get information about, for instance, the final distribution. Okay, and you can get information about this distribution. It can be, for instance, the occupation probability of something, etc., through a maximum entropy approach. Again, you have a quantity, in this case is the entropy, is no longer the action, and then by maximize this entropy, you get essentially the shape under some constraint, you get the shape that better describe your data under the given constraints. So was just to give you a brief overview of these variational principles. So what do we need for our stuff? Well, we need a statistical description, so in terms of a statistical ensemble. We need constraints that allow us to link microscopic behaviors to some macroscopic observable, okay, something that then we can measure. And when I say this, I refer to, for instance, operators or matrices like the adjacency matrix of a network, or in general, how things interact with each other. And then we need an entropy measure. This entropy measure is fundamental because of what I have told you just in the previous slide, because in this way we can develop, for instance, a maximum entropy approach. And after pulling together these three ingredients, we will be able to find something, a functional linking between what we call the micro and the macro. And why physics? Because statistical physics provide us exactly with the correct language to do this job. What do we need? Well, we need models, as I was saying before, but in complex systems, we know that realistic models are complicated. The right word here is very complex, actually. Why? Because we have a structure, we have some function, of course, and everything depends on the environment, and the structure affects the function through the dynamics, and the dynamics affect the topology at the same time. And the interplay between this structure and dynamics is something that defines a specific function. Let me give you a quick example. Here on the right, you have two maps, there are networks. One is the map of, this should be like London. And here you have a metabolic pathway network. Well, this is the structure, so just the map. If you add the dynamics, so the rules, how to transfer information or the signaling, whatever you like, from one place to another, you have something like this. This is very nice. Okay, it looks very, very cool because in this situation, everything works like a charm. The point is that in the real world, when you put together the two things, in this case, for instance, you get traffic jam. And here you can have issues in the flow, in the signaling flow. Why this happens? Because the interplay between structure and dynamics is something that, once coupled with the environment, leads to other emergent phenomena. So, to describe something like this, what would we need? We need something that will drive us towards the architecture of a living system, like, describing how the state of our system in terms of in self-interactions, the coupling strength between pairwise, here let me say network interactions in general, that depends, it's not just pairwise, this depends on the state of node I, the state of node J, and then how node I and node J interact with each other by means of some rules, but it can depend also on external signals and in the environment. Well, what we have also, we have plasticity because the interactions can change over time and they can change as a function of the states, as a function of the external signal, as a function of the environment. And then we have adaptation. So the parameters defining our model depend by themselves on external signal, they can depend on environment, and so they can change in response to given inputs. And finally, we have the coevolution between the system and the environment, because the environment itself can change in response to changes in the state of your system. Well, I agree with you, this is very complicated, okay? But it's actually a very nice way to attack problems. Why? Because if you start thinking in this way, then every process that you see out there with some, again, with some care, because I have discussed what we call the kind of mean field approximation. We should account also for noise, etc. But at this stage, it's fine to discuss in this way. You can model stuff like this. So this is a simulation that I have finished just a couple of days ago. And why it's beautiful? Because it's pretty much realistic. Here you have several voids. They are like, the void is a fish. There you have predators, and they are reactive to each other by means of very simple models, okay, that are coupled together. But then I have coupled this to other dynamics. I have added the trophic levels, I have added response to change in the environment, I have added some other realism like the daylight, the circadian rhythm, and stuff like this. And you see that it looks pretty realistic in behavior. They can forage and do a lot of things. Okay, so this is very, very interesting. And you can use the previous model to model the, let's say, the average behavior of this system. But we cannot do this at this level nowadays. Okay, so for what I have to say later, in a couple of minutes, we cannot use this type of model. So you will be happy to know that we have to simplify, we have to compress our description of the reality to something that is much, let's say, easier to deal with. To this aim, let's consider something that has this simple shape, okay, simpler shape. This is here the state of our system. You can consider some self-interactions and a coupling that modulates the importance of the interactions between the units in your system, and also accounting for the possible presence of noise. Let's simplify further and let's rewrite this in another shape. Here we have still the same state of the system, but now it's a vector, okay, according to I am just using a different notation. And then what I am trying to do is to write the evolution of this vector as the application of an operator to that vector, okay, in such a way that you can write, under some specific approximation, the evolved version of the vector, the evolution of this vector as the application of a propagator to the initial state of this vector. Okay, so I hope that this was was clear, because this is the key point. Okay, if we do this and describe the dynamics in terms of state, now we can define functionality in a way that is related to how the perturbations to that state propagates. To do this, let's try to keep, again, the math as low as possible. Essentially, you have your what we can call information pathways, okay, at a given time scale. And here you assume that you make a perturbation on node I. You can do this perturbation wherever you want. You can do different type of perturbation. And if you consider all these perturbations, you build an ensemble of perturbation propagation. Okay. And the nice thing is that you can encode all of these entries in this ensemble to say into an operator. And this is the nice thing. So what we have to do is a shift in the mindset. We move from an ensemble of networks to an ensemble that describe the propagation events over the networks. Okay, this is the major shift. Then, if you got this point, you can simply assume that this can be encoded mathematically into one operator that we call the density matrix. This operator is very beautiful, is not complicated to write it down, and it's very nice because you can work analytically with it most of the time. So essentially with this framework, we are enabled to do a lot of things, okay? Not just to rely on simulations, for instance. So here we move from the propagation pathways, we build to build the operators that describe the interplay between a specific structure and a specific dynamics, and from here we build a statistical field. This allows us to complete the first requirement of the ingredients I was talking before, so a statistical description. Then we need the constraints linking the micro to macro, and here we use time instead of space as a lens. If you have signaling and then you wait over time, you see that you can form structures, and these structures get more and more integrated over time. This is interesting because a short time you can capture only very localized propagation, while if you wait enough, long time capture a more global organization. And finally, we have also our entropy measure. As you can see, it's very simple. It's known as von Neumann entropy. It has nothing to share with quantum mechanics. I mean, this is the entropy that you can calculate from this operator. And the main point is about finding and defining this operator in the correct way. Then from here, you get an important point. This entropy measure the diversity of the propagation of this perturbation in response to an external perturbation. So high entropy means more diverse response. Lower entropy, like here, means that you have less propagation pathways and this is the more constrained propagation. This is very important because we are going to use this guy for our purpose. Then you can say, okay, well, very nice, but many times we have, in empirical setting, we have the structure, we don't have the dynamics. And what if we don't want to use a specific model? Well, even in that case, you can use what I was saying before. You can use a maximum entropy principle, and without going into the technicalities, start from the entropy, apply your constraints, and then maximize this operator, this Lagrangian here. And what you get is a very beautiful solution, is what we call a Gibbsian state. Okay, it has a very, very simple shape, and it corresponds actually to the case of a diffusive dynamics. So when you don't know what to do, use diffusion. This is essentially the message of all this framework. And so we have this now. We have our structure, and then the functionality is what comes in terms of these operators and this entropy from the interplay between the structure and the dynamics in response to some external perturbation. That is something that is very typical for complex adaptive systems. You can use this tool, and as I was mentioning before, as a function of the time scale to uncover different spatial scales, if you want. For instance, if the time is very short, so a short time scale, you end up with a theory that could be described at the level of single degrees, but then by allowing the time so allowing more time and the information to flow, you have small clusters, so you can inspect the mesoscale, entire components, etc., etc. So this is very, very relevant because we can measure the diversity of the configurations that are activated in response to some perturbation within a specific time scale. Okay, so this approach is a multi-resolution, if you want, or multiscale. There is this paper by Carlo Nicolini and others. So some years ago, they applied this was the early beginning of this framework. So I will not go into details. They applied this to study the brain under some conditions, and well, the idea is that thanks to this to the study of how this entropy, this diversity, changes over time, that you can see as an integration scale, you can perform this multi-resolution analysis, and you can even you can even see how it differs for different, let's say, different topologies and different hierarchies, for instance. And it is very different, so the empirical one is very different from its randomized version. So it allows also for very grounded and principled comparisons with null models. At the same time, from other studies, we have discovered that hierarchy and modular structures and modularity, if you want, they allow the flows to be more persistent. And this is very important for real complex systems. Here you can see this very, very quickly from, so here I fix the modular structure, and then I increase the hierarchy in this direction from left to the right, and you see that the entropy necessitates more time to decay. This means that the flow here is more persistent. This diversity of response is more persistent over time. And if you fix the hierarchical structure, you look at the modularity, so the modularity here increases from the right to the left. See, there is not a lot of change, but there is still some change. So less modular and more hierarchical is something that in this framework emerge as a kind of prescription for persistent flows. So let's fix the concept for one moment. Up to now, we have built a statistical description of the propagation of these perturbations. And now the direct question is how can we use this to tell something about real systems? Okay, so in this second part, it will be a bit quicker. I will essentially describe how functionality is determined by the flows, and I will do this through three practical examples based on the analysis of real data. So I will start with the first, that is, how can we break the functionality? And this relates to robustness. Well, if you have done network science, have studied network science, you know that a classical assumption is that if you break the structure, at the same time, you will break the function. And we usually tend to analyze how the structure changes as a function of the attacks that we do to the network, because in this way we have a proxy for the function. Here I am questioning to which extent this is always true. And in practice, if there exists some configuration where the structure remains, so you are not disintegrating a network, but at the same time, you are degrading its functionality. So this is a very nice example to decouple in a manifest way the structure from the function. To do this, let's assume that I have a network that consists of subsystems. Okay, you can picture like this. I did it in this way to make it to exaggerate the organization, the mesoscale organization into subsystems. And we say that there is some functionality if A and B are able to exchange some flow through the network. Okay, so in a nutshell, this thing on the right side. So A and B must exchange some information to support functionality. Let's see what happens. So at very short range, if I start a signal from here, it has no time to reach A. If I move to, and I wait enough, let's say, so mid-range temporal scale, through this pathway, I still have not enough time. Through this pathway, I have already reached the subsystem A. If I wait for very long time, I have multiple pathways to have what we call functional flow. Functional because it allows B and A to exchange information. This is before a damage. Now let's try to attack the central part of this system. Okay, so let's think about removing it from the system for any reason. In the case of a connectome, you might think about it like a stroke or whatever you like. So here we have still a structure that is connected, okay, except for this part which has been physically disconnected. But at the same time, we cannot say that the functionality remains there, because if you remember, in the mid-range we had functionality, functional flow, and now without this part we have no functional flow. To have functional flow, we need to wait much more time. And so this is I think a very simple example to understand what I mean when I talk about the difference between structural and functional analysis of the robustness. So to understand now if the nodes that are important for the structure are also important for the function, let's introduce some measure of the functional importance of the nodes. Okay. Again, I don't want to enter into the mathematical details. Imagine that based on the density matrix, which relates also to propagators of information, you can build a way, you can build some metric, some descriptor that allows to tell how much information is exchanged by I and J through the network according to a specific dynamics. And then you can use this information to build an average over the full network. Okay, this number is between 0 and 1. If it's 0 or close to 0, it means that the propagation of the flow of the information is very constrained, the flows are dysfunctional. If it's close to 1, the flow is functional and there is diverse propagation, etc. To understand if a node is important, let's start from the unperturbed network, and we calculate its polynomial entropy here, and then we make an attack. We can choose different type of attack. Here, the simplest type of attack is to just remove the edges of the node I, the focal node. And we calculate again the same entropy, but after this perturbation. To understand if that net node is important or not, let's just calculate the difference between those two entropies. And let's use this difference to rank the nodes. If we do that, and we apply this to real data, what we find is very, very interesting. Here I have chosen the two examples that can be most of interest for neuroscientists, like many who are in the audience. This is the C. elegans connectome, and here there is the number I have told you before as a function of the removed fraction of nodes. But instead, of course, of calculating the largest connected component, I am calculating this average received information. Here you have two panels because I am considering two different time scales. The colors reflect different metrics, different descriptors used to attack, to detach the nodes. As you can see here, I go to this panel because it's more interesting, because after enough time, you see that there is a difference between the different descriptors. Here you have betweenness, here you have the degree, here you have random detachment, and then you have other measures. The point is this entanglement, the centrality that I am introduced in the previous slide, is the one that reduces the faster to reduce the average received information. And this is not by chance. This is because with this quantity, we are really targeting the function and the functional content, okay, throwing of the nodes. Well, it would be better to say the functional importance of the nodes through the network. What we learn from here is that nodes that are important for the information dynamics keep the structure connected, but the vice versa is not true. And at the same time, but I have no time to show, so if you have a question about this, I will have a backup slide. We cannot predict these nodes, the ones that are important for information dynamics, from the structure alone. So this is a very nice result. We have applied also this to the connectome of a human. And here the results are pretty similar. So we get exactly the same sites. And here, just to let you know that, so these are two representations of one of the connectome that has been attacked. So where the 20% of nodes have been attacked, and so removed. And we have considered the entanglement at this time scale. Okay, and here you see that it's much faster when you attack this through the entanglement, this entanglement descriptor. Well, the second point of the application is, okay, we have this functionality, but can we predict it some way by using what I was telling you at the very beginning, variational principles. So without going through the mathematical details, just let me give you the idea. So this is a practical example to give you the general idea. Let's assume that we have water. If you decrease the energy of the system, what you get is ice. You know this. If you increase the energy, instead you get some steam. Okay, what it happens here, very poorly speaking, is that nature is trading connections, bonds actually, for energy. In a similar way, you can think that networks trade links for functionality. And let's see how it happens. Let's start from a fully disconnected, almost fully disconnected network. And here, instead of just having entropy, I have the difference of entropy with respect to a reference, okay? And the reference is of disconnected nodes. Here, instead, I have the gain in the signaling speed. It's a measure that I didn't introduce for lack of time, but you can think that it's very well defined, and we call this the difference in the free energy of the system. So here the system is, of course, we can agree that a system like this is dysfunctional. No flows from one place to another because we have not enough link and no global propagation. Then if we have enough links, we have that the connectivity emerge. We say that the network percolates, right? Because now we can go from anywhere to everywhere. But still, at this level, we might not have a function emerging. Then we find some average, some average condition, let's say some average configuration that is in the middle, where we have at the same time a very fast propagation of signal through the network, but at the same time we keep the diversity of responses. Then we keep adding edges, connections, but now the network is overconnected. There are too many links, and essentially every node responds to every external perturbation. This is not good because we are losing diversity. So essentially what happens is that in this very simplified representation, we have the need to maximize the speed of signaling because it's what we want. But at the same time, this happens at the expense of the loss of diversity, of response diversity. So we want to minimize the loss of response diversity. So we have two competing requirements. We solved this by introducing this very simple quantity. And the ones among you remember physics and thermodynamics will recognize that this is very similar in spirit to what we call efficiency. Let me call it efficiency here as well to simplify in the discussion. And if you use this efficiency and you ask your network to have a number of edges that scales as a power law of the number of nodes, and you don't know what is this exponent, so it is 1, it's very sparse, the network is sparse. If it's close to 2, the network is dense. And then we say, what happens if we want to maximize this efficiency? To find what is the, let me call it again, poorly speaking, the optimal density of edges. So essentially, maximize this quantity to calculate the gamma. If you do this, and do all the calculations, analytically, you find the gamma must be 1. That means then networks must be sparse. So sparsity is not something that is engineered. It's something that emerges naturally from some thermodynamic argument. And if you look at real data, as we did here from 6 different domains and over about 600 networks, you find that you have this scaling where the exponent is very close to 1. But this is not the end of the story. Because functionality, as I told you, is not defined at a single scale. It's defined, it emerges across multiple scales. So what happens if we get this efficiency and we integrate it over time between 0 and infinite? What are we doing here? So at short scale, the efficiency captures local transport, very rapid local transport. At the larger scales, it captures the integration, the persistence of the flows. So if we integrate, what we are doing is to try to account everything together and to mix those contributions across all the scales into a single thermodynamic object. Once we do that, and we use this quantity to drive the choice, for instance, of the rewiring. This is a simulation. Okay, so let me go. I have 1 minute for this. So this is a single network, a random network. Okay, and here we make a simulation where we ask two nodes to rewire if in order to maximize this quantity at each time step. If you do this, after a while, after some time, you see the emergence of this structure, and this is a hierarchical structure. This is very nice. And if you do the analysis across real data over different domains, you get, and you compare this number against the number that you will obtain from a configuration model, you get again the emergence of hierarchy from this description, from this framework. So it's very interesting for us because now we are trying to exploit. This is still work under review, but we're trying already to exploit this finding. And now with the last one, so I have just a couple of minutes and I conclude. We have discussed how information, these flows, okay, so they regulate information through thermodynamics. The next point is to understand where the flows go, and this is done by geometry. When I say geometry, I don't refer to geometry that is Euclidean geometry, but geometry in a latent space, where the distance reflects some functional interaction. Very quickly on this, imagine that we start from some structure, then we add hypotheses about the dynamics as we did before, and then imagine that from the perturbations we can build a distance between node I and j. This distance accounts for how they respond to these perturbations, okay, over time. And then to have just a distance matrix, we can choose to have some kind of average over time over all these pairs. What is the point? That in this latent space, if two nodes are functionally similar, they signal with each other very easily, they will be very close into this latent space. Otherwise, they will be far and will be very well separated. So what we've done was to try to use this framework to study the human brain. Here we have used, in collaboration with one of my former PhD students from the Padua Neuroscience Center and other collaborators here at the Department of Physics at the University of Padua, we have considered group averaged connectomes from healthy subjects, and as a reference mesoscale, we used the Schaeffer parcellation that, if I remember correctly, is obtained from functional connectivity. What is functional connectivity in the neuroscience community? So the idea is to use this structure, then we add dynamics, and here we have chosen a typical neuronal activation dynamics to build the distance matrix that I told you before, and use this distance matrix in the way that I told you before to find regions in the space, in this latent space, to understand which node is close to which other node. And we found this result. If we quantify or try to quantify the difference between what we get and a reference mesoscale according to the Schaeffer parcellation, what we get is that this Jacobian approach, this latent geometry approach, gets the largest average mutual information when it's compared to other measures. I can go into more details later if you want. So this is again, another evidence that this approach is very, very promising for this type of analysis. So to wrap up, I think that we need to build a theory of network functionality and to understand what functionality is in complex adaptive systems and how it emerges from the interplay between structure and dynamics. We need to understand, first of all, what is the architecture of complex biological systems in terms of both the logic and the circuitry, what we call the circuitry. We need to well separate the fact that structure constrains the flows, but what reveal the functionality is the flows, essentially. And then we need a principle and testable framework for quantifying this functionality. And we have at least two approaches. One is based on thermodynamics to tell us how much flow, essentially, and one is based on latent space geometry or network-induced processes that tell us where it flows. So with this, I conclude. It's just to let you know that here, for the records, you have the papers, very recent papers, where you can take all the information needed to better understand what, let's say, the technicalities of this work. And here there is also, thanks to Kayson for introducing it before, a blog post that is not that technical, where I cover some of the aspects that I have discussed in this talk. Then there are also some web pages from the lab website dedicated specifically to the thermodynamic part and the geometric part. And we have the GitHub of the lab, where we have shared essentially everything. So you can find all the data set that we use and more than 20 libraries where you can find all the tools that I have used, that we have used in our studies to find the results discussed in this talk. So thank you again very much to the organizers for the opportunity to discuss my work here, and I hope that it was not too technical for you to follow, and I will be happy to discuss with you if you have any question. So thank you again.
Thanks so much.